tell us the story of this guy that came forward as Billy the Kid, because most people don't know this story.
Yeah. So first, it's funny because most people don't even know who Billy the Kid is. So Billy the Kid was a teenage outlaw in the American West. And think about 1870, 1880. So after the Civil War in 1865 ends, you had a new administration coming in and literally changing wholesale the Southern way of life. Okay. Like they called them carpetbaggers. So they came in and this is the way it's going to be. And if you don't like it, tough, you lost, whatever. A lot of people said, I'm out of here. Okay. They went west.
Right. Because
so
this was more than just ending slavery. This was
Oh, yeah.
you're gonna live life the way that we live up in the North, because slavery is over. You're an ignorant peasant or farm owner or slave owner, and not only are you going to get rid of your slaves, which was obviously morally just, but now you're going to live like we live, dress like we dress, wear our newspaper or read our newspapers. Like they tried to change the entire culture of the South, right?
It was, yeah, they tried to, it was a very complex time,
Mm-hmm.
Rather than heal and allow, this is a very complex thing, but my understanding is rather than kind of allow them to heal, they conquered, to a degree. And now there's a lot of Confederate monuments and things like that, but there was a lot of the carpetbagging stuff. And anyway, you had people from the North and the South going west, some for a profit motive. There was the gold rushes and things like that, heading to California and all that. But you had a real hodgepodge of people. Plus, there was not a lot of law early on, and it was very freewheeling. So if you're a big cattle guy, and you had 20, 30 cowboys riding for you, I mean, you were the law. I mean, one little measly town sheriff, he's not going to do anything. I mean, sheriffs were killed fairly routinely,
right.
And deputies were killed fairly routinely. There's a lot of vigilantism. Like it was just a very different world. So, you had a lot of very dangerous men and people going west. And in the middle of this is this 17-year-old kid, 5'6", 150 pounds, who's the baddest guy of anybody. And he lived among these rough and ready people and dominated. I mean, he was the scariest one, fastest on the draw, all that stuff. So this is Billy the Kid, supposedly, who was a desperado in New Mexico. He's in the Lincoln County War, which is the cattlemen eventually start going after each other, and all their cowboys are killing each other. So anyway, they killed Billy the Kid's boss, John Tunstall, and Judge Wilson deputized as constables some of his cowhands and made them the regulators. And then they went out to round up the people that killed his boss. And then they ended up killing them. And it was just a mess. So finally, the president of the United States sent in Lew Wallace, who was a Civil War general, the guy who wrote Ben-Hur, to kind of clean up the territory because it was so corrupt and bad. So long story short, he had promised.
Hold on. The guy who was hired to hunt down the regulators in New Mexico and I guess into Arizona and Texas and whatnot, the guy who was hired to do that was a Civil War general who wrote the book Ben-Hur?
Yeah. So not exactly. The governor. So they removed Governor Axtell, and they put Ulysses S. Grant, the president, put in Lew Wallace, who was a Civil War general who wrote Ben-Hur.
Wow. I love Ben-Hur. Side note.
Yeah. Yeah. So he comes in and is like, look, amnesty. Okay. Everybody, you're all pardoned. Okay. Except for Billy the Kid. He's the only one that we're not going to give a pardon to. And they met privately, and the governor said the bad guys in Lincoln had killed this lawyer, Huston Chapman, who was a lawyer for Alexander McSween's wife. They had killed Alexander McSween, who was a good guy, peace-loving guy, Christian guy. And they shot him down. And then I'm not telling the story right. Let me back up. So the Lincoln County War culminates in this Battle of Lincoln, okay, where it's Billy the Kid's people and the Murphy Dolan faction. They had their people, and they were the corrupt ones. They were in cahoots with Governor Axtell and the Santa Fe Ring, which is all these district attorneys and crooked politicians. So Billy the Kid's team is basically whooping them, okay? They're winning the war. And then the U.S. Army comes in with Gatling guns and soldiers and all that. And Billy the Kid's side loses. So he makes another one of his miraculous escapes. They burn the house down. You see in Young Guns where they burn the house down and they come out shooting. Well, that kind of happened. It didn't happen exactly the way, but basically Billy the Kid does a miraculous escape, and Alexander McSween comes out and they kill him. Well, his wife, they were very wealthy, and his wife has some litigation going after Colonel Dudley, who's the commanding officer of the cavalry that came in and killed her husband. And he has a lawyer in town, and they just killed him right on the street. They just killed him. And so Billy the Kid actually was willing to testify that they had killed this guy in cold blood. Everybody else was scared of them because they were so corrupt. So the governor said, if you testify, I'll give you a pardon for everything you did. Well, he testified, and then the governor never gave him a pardon. Instead, he got arrested. That's when he escaped from the Lincoln County Jail. He killed the 2 deputies. He escaped. So this guy was, I mean, marvelous in the sense of like, it's unbelievable what he did. He's like a pro athlete. You know, he's a little kid guarded by 2 grown men, shackled to the floor. They're armed, and he escapes and kills them both. Like, how the heck does that happen? The guy was a demon. He was a terror. He was a very bad dude. And so anyway, he escapes, and then months later, or really, I think it was the next month, actually, Pat Garrett and a posse goes to Fort Sumner, which is about 15, I don't know, a few hours away, and they supposedly catch him on the porch, and that's when he says, you know, QNS, do you know this story?
No.
All right. I'll try to do a good job telling it. You're going to have to heavily edit this. I'm sorry.
No, we're good.
So Billy the Kid is in Fort Sumner, which is a Mexican town, and he's far away from Lincoln, which is where he's wanted. Pat Garrett is the sheriff of Lincoln County. He knows the kid goes all around all the little towns, and he hears there's a dance in Fort Sumner. So he thinks, if I'm the kid, I'd probably be at that dance, because the kid likes to hang out with the Mexicans and dance. So he comes with 2 deputies to Fort Sumner. The funny thing is, his ex-wife is from Fort Sumner, and she died, and they hate his guts in Fort Sumner. So everybody is Billy the Kid's friend in Fort Sumner. They all hate Pat Garrett. Also, the sheriff of Baca County, Sheriff Romero, is the local jurisdiction. Garrett's out of his jurisdiction. He's the sheriff of Lincoln. People will say, oh, he was also a U.S. Marshal, whatever, but he was acting as the sheriff of Lincoln, out of his jurisdiction, in this other guy's jurisdiction, looking for Billy the Kid with 2 deputies. So he goes to this rancher, Pete Maxwell, and it's nighttime. You know, back then there's no screens on the windows or doors. They leave the doors and windows open. So the 2 deputies are on the porch chatting. It's late at night, big moonlit night. And Garrett says, I'm going to go talk to Pete. I'm going to wake him up and see if he's seen the kid around. So he goes and wakes up Pete and says, have you seen the kid? Meanwhile, the kid has been at this dance with his buddy, supposedly. And he goes to his friend's house and he says, I'm really hungry. Can you give me anything to eat? And they said, well, we have beans and tortillas, but if you want meat, Pete Maxwell killed a deer today. It's hanging on the back porch. You can go cut some off, bring it back, and I'll cook it up for you. You can have that. So he goes over. This is the official version. Comes over, walks up on the porch. Supposedly he's zipping up his pants, okay, which leads some to say maybe he was having a romantic encounter with Pete Maxwell's sister. Don't know. So he comes up on the porch, and he doesn't see the deputies because they're kind of sitting down behind a post, and it's dark. And then he sees them. Supposedly he pulls his gun really quick and says, QNS, who are you? And they look and they stand up and they go, buddy, we're not going to hurt you. We're friends. We're not going to hurt you. And they didn't speak Spanish. And he says, QNS, who are you? In Spanish. So they're like, we're friends. We're friends. So he backs into Pete's darkened bedroom, thinking Pete's in there, not knowing Garrett's in there. Pete sees him, says to Garrett, and says, that's the kid. Garrett shoots him in the dark without identifying him. Just shoots. He sees this silhouette in the doorway, shoots him, and runs out of the. He's scared to death. The kid's going to shoot back. So he shoots twice, runs out the door. The deputies are just talking to this guy. He goes in the bedroom. They hear 2 gunshots, and somebody comes running out. So they go for their guns, and it's their boss, Pat Garrett. And they're like, Pat, what the hell? You know, what's going on? Because they thought he was a Mexican ranch hand.
Right.
Okay, this is the official story. They think he's a Mexican ranch hand. And Pat says, no, that was the kid. I think I got him. And the John Poe, one of the deputies, goes, Pat, the kid wouldn't have come here. You shot the wrong guy. And he said that Garrett was like really scared for a second. He goes, no, that was him. I know his voice too well to be mistaken. That was him. So they say, we killed Billy the Kid. And the friends of Billy the Kid surround the house. They're going to kill him. They're going to lynch the deputies and the cop because he's out of his jurisdiction. They don't know who this guy is. Well, actually, they hate him because his wife lived there. So they barricade themselves in Pete Maxwell's house. They allow the Mexican women to come get the body, prepare it for burial. They go bury the body. The next day, Garrett rounds up the local men of the town and has them sign a coroner's jury report. And he doesn't like what they write, so he rips it up and rewrites it himself, gives it to them and has them sign it, and then he loses it, the second one. So he goes back to Lincoln and says, I killed Billy the Kid. He's dead. And I want the reward because there was a reward for killing Billy the Kid. They refused to give it to him. They wouldn't give him the reward. And that's it. That's the story. And so did he kill Billy the Kid or not?
No.
Because exactly.
Why would Billy the Kid speak Spanish to a couple white kids and say "quién es"? Like come on. It was
a cop buddy of mine told me that. He goes, I know right there he didn't kill him. I said, how? He goes, because if I talk to you in English, if you talk to me in Spanish and I respond in English, then you're going to respond in English.
Yeah, 100%. Right? That's human nature.
Yeah. And down in Key West, I go to a lot of Cuban, restaurants and stuff, and they talk to me because I have black hair. So they talk to me in Spanish. And as soon as they hear that I'm a, gringo, they talk to me in English, right? So, but if I try to fake my Spanish, they'll keep talking to me in Spanish. So yeah, right there, it's fishy. So there's a lot of reasons to suspect that Garrett didn't kill the kid. A lot of people said they saw him after that. They issued a warrant for his arrest. That was 1881. They issued a warrant for his arrest in 1883 and 1885. So that would seem to lead you to believe that maybe they didn't kill him. But he never showed up, right? So until he showed up, you really wouldn't know. Well, in 1950, he showed up. And he says he didn't kill me.
In 1950, so he would have been 90 years old, 80 years old?
90 years old, going on 91.
90 years old, supposedly, Billy the Kid, who was going by what? Like, because obviously he was hiding out for 50 years.
Yeah. So the story he told was around 1910, 1911. He was a lawman. So I actually tracked down a lot of the aliases he used and found photos of him doing the things he said, like in the Rough Riders with Teddy Roosevelt. So it's all in my book. That's why I think my book has done so well, because there's actual evidence in there that you can piece together. And so he was going by the name William H. Roberts. Brushy Bill Roberts was his nickname. And people will say, well, Oliver Roberts, which was the guy's name was Oliver P. Roberts. But in the historical record, sometimes it's Oliver P., sometimes it's Oliver L. In the census, sometimes he says his parents were born in Kentucky. Other times he says they were born someplace else. So like it's constantly, he's dodging, he's hiding. And so, and he wasn't discovered. So what happened is a childhood friend of his, Jesse Evans, who's in the Billy the Kid TV series on Epix. They have this character, Jesse Evans. That was a real guy. So in Tombstone, the gang, the boys with the red sash and Curly Bill Brocious and Johnny Ringo and all these guys. So that was the boys. That was a real gang. And Jesse Evans was the leader of that gang. And Billy the Kid rode with those guys at one point. There was a Seven Rivers gang. There were the boy. There was a bunch of different gangs that Billy rode with, a bunch of different guys. But Jesse Evans was that guy. Well, Jesse Evans was supposedly killed a Texas Ranger in 1881, escaped prison in 1883, and disappeared. So in the old days, escaped, a lot of times they killed him. The deputies would kill the guy and say, oh, he escaped. Well, allegedly, they left him for dead, but he didn't die and survived. And he lived under an alias until 1949 when his brother died in North Dakota.
This is Jesse Evans, also comes out of hiding 50 years later.
Right. So when Jesse Evans goes to court to get his inheritance, the court assigns a probate attorney, this guy, William Morrison. And he's interviewing Jesse Evans. And just how life is, William Morrison, the lawyer, was a distant relative of Pete Maxwell, who owned the house where Billy the Kid was supposedly killed by Pat Garrett. So he says to Jesse Evans, wow, I can't believe you knew Billy the Kid. I'm a distant relative of Pete Maxwell, who owned the house where Garrett killed Billy. And Jesse said, Garrett never killed Billy, not in 1881, not ever. He's still alive. And he's like, well, tell me more. And he's like, nope, I'm not telling you anything. And he's like, well, who can I talk to? He goes, we'll talk to this guy. So he sends him to talk to this guy, J. Frank Dalton, who claimed to be Jesse James in 1948. So it's just this onion of nonsense, right? That's why people reject it, I think, because it seems like this onion of nonsense. And,
I thought it's too Hollywood.
Yeah, and I thought it was an onion of nonsense also. But so Dalton leads him to this guy, Brushy Bill.
But hold on.
Yeah.
I have some interesting conspiracy theories or stuff that I'll read in passing where I'm like, oh, that's super interesting. Like I'll go down a YouTube rabbit hole and I'll read a couple articles. Maybe I'll even invest like 10 hours listening to a book on Audible. but I've never been so obsessed with something where I'm like, you know what I'm going to do for the next year? I'm going to research everything that has to do with, you know, Second Earth or Billy the Kid or whatever.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
are you like on the spectrum or something? Like, how did you go from like, oh, this is an interesting story to I'm going to learn everything about this and write a best-selling book on it? Like, it just seems like such a weird, like, hard left turn. Like, what happened?
I don't know, man.